Greetings, everybody. I'm obviously Jesus, here for the second Patreon video for the month of 2017, November things. Yes, that's what we call it here in America. And today, I am not making that Israel-Palestine video because it's such a big thing, I don't know that I'm actually ever going to get around it. I wanted to sort of divert and talk about current events, such as they are, and talk a little bit about the Court of Public Opinion, which is going to be the title of this video. And it's going to specifically reference the slew of allegations and some admissions that have come out about, sexual assault and sexual misconduct in the past few weeks after the big watershed moment, which was the outing of Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein, or Weinstein, or however the hell you pronounce it, as a big-time sexual predator, breaking into women's trailers and masturbating in front of them and doing all sorts of fucking weird and terrible shit. So after that, for those of you who haven't been following the news that much and dismissed it as a bunch of liberal fucking faff and such and poppycock and all that, basically emboldened by the women who came out to accuse Harvey Weinstein, who is a big, powerful Hollywood producer. A lot of women have come forth about, allegations. They come forward with allegations about other people in the entertainment industry, be it Hollywood, movies and TV and all that, or, the music industry and, everything in between. It's been a big, like I said, a watershed moment. There's been a lot of talk about, all these people. There's just a list of men, I think, on the internet somewhere who have been accused just in the past couple weeks since the Weinstein thing. And so it's been sort of an unparalleled moment in terms of women coming out, mostly women, not always women. There have been some men who have made accusations, and we'll talk about that. Most notably, I think, someone accused Kevin Spacey, great actor, unfortunately not the greatest person, as it turns out, of making a pass at him when he was 14, and Spacey, I think, was 25 or 26. So, there's a lot of big names involved, a lot of powerful people in all sorts of spheres. It's overflowing into politics as well, with this weird senator named Roy Moore, who carries a gun in his pocket or something, alleged to have made advances on a 14-year-old girl. Lots of very disturbing shit coming out, and we're going to talk about that, because one of the things that has stemmed from that is, or not necessarily stemmed from that, but there's always been this big conflict, honestly. And I'm going to read from my notes a lot here on my phone. My printer's still broken, as you might imagine, because I literally can't remember to I'm surprised I remember to buy food, honestly. If I weren't such a fat fuck, I don't think I would remember to buy food, honestly. I cannot remember to do goddamn anything. But, with all these accusations and admissions floating around out there now, it is, harder than ever to really reconcile the need of a society to have a presumption of innocence in its justice system with a society that also desires to be compassionate and to believe the victims when they allege that they have been sexually assaulted or been the victims of other types of sexual misconduct. So, these two things are at sort of a crossroads, or they're at odds, so to speak, because, you want to believe the victim. You want to believe the person who says that they've been hurt, because, you don't want to put a person like that in a position where, their friends don't believe them, their support group doesn't believe them, not like an actual sit around in a circle support group, but like their social support group doesn't believe them. And you certainly don't want to put a victim of a crime in a position where the investigating police agencies are skeptical of them. But it also sort of stands counter to the idea that society needs a presumption of innocence. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself in my notes, and I don't want to lose track. For just some statistics, that's the word, before we get into the main part of the video. The Department of Justice reported in 1996 that, based on its research, it said maybe that 8% of rape allegations had been determined to be false. Similar studies in Denmark, the year wasn't given where I looked for this, said that only 1.5% of allegations of rape were fake, and Canada once reported 10%. But even if we take the worst number out of that, at 10%, that is still cause to, believe that generally speaking, we should believe the victim when they make a claim that they have been sexually assaulted. If 9 out of 10 people, if 9 out of 10 dentists were sexually assaulted, we believe dentists, right? But, 9 out of 10 people, even if it's that much, even if 1 in 10 is a lie, it still gives you pause, and you have a reason to believe a victim initially when they make an allegation. So the idea that we shouldn't even, that all rape, claims are fake, or that most of them are fake, or that they're just, petty vendettas being carried out in the legal system is, I don't believe, supported or substantiated in any way by any kind of actual data. But, on the other hand, you don't want to damage an innocent person's reputation. This is where the conflict comes in, because, it's obviously not as severe to lose your career and lose your livelihood based on an allegation of sexual assault. It's not as severe as someone who is actually being assaulted, but, keep in mind that even though it's sort of like apples and oranges, and they're in completely different leagues of pain and suffering, losing a person's reputation versus losing, feeling safe in their own bodies, basically. A person who is falsely accused of a sexual crime or a sexual misconduct of any kind, if they're truly being falsely accused, if that's the actual state of things, then they are in turn made a victim of a person who is trying to damage their reputation unjustly if they truly have done nothing wrong. So we have on either side the potentiality for victimhood. One is most certainly worse than the other in terms of the potential damage it can do to a person's psyche, but you still, in a perfect world, we wouldn't want anybody to be a victim. We wouldn't want anybody to, have, their life ruined if they truly have done nothing wrong, or if they truly have done, they have not done the thing that they're being accused of. So there is the potential for victimhood on both sides. And I don't think the idea that we need a presumption of innocence is some kind of weird, fanciful, antiquated thing, because if we had no requirement for a presumption of innocence in society, it would be complete and total chaos. People would be able to ruin other people's lives with just a few words, and it would be a battle of who could accuse whom first. And it would very quickly, if the presumption of innocence were abandoned entirely, it would very quickly devolve into just a competition, like I said, about who could accuse whom first, who has the bigger belief base, who has more people, who stands behind their version of events than the other person. So having a presumption of innocence is, I don't think, in any way, even among the most liberal people, except for maybe a few fringe groups, I don't think that there's any justification that a society can exist without a presumption of innocence, because it would just completely break down everything. It would completely break down everything from a legal standpoint, and the society could not survive, because it would all devolve into this big, mess and quagmire of mob rule. So I really don't think, and I talked about this a little bit in my response to Sargon of Akkad's a liberal progressives video, I don't think that even most progressives would, advise in any case abandoning the presumption of innocence, even in cases where, it's very PC and social justice-y to want to always believe the victim and always take their word for it. But these are still very hard things to reconcile. How do you believe the victim always in a society where presumption of innocence, and this is true for all societies, is necessary? And that is what I'm going to try to navigate in this video. And, the two most important groups of people, like I said before when I said I was getting ahead of myself, that need to believe the victim are the police and law enforcement agencies that investigate the alleged crime, and the people who are closest to the alleged victim. Like I said, you don't want to leave a person who has been victimized in any way, shape, or form in a position where their social group is suspicious of them and thinks they're lying and abandons them. And you don't want to leave, you don't want to have the only people who could potentially bring the accused to justice, have they truly done something wrong. You don't want them, taking it not very seriously because, oh, you know, for whatever reason, whatever stupid patriarchal reason that, you know, cops might dismiss a rape claim or something of that nature. Oh, she was asking for it, et cetera, et cetera. You don't want the nonchalance that sometimes, not so much these days, I think, because people are starting to take it a lot more seriously in terms of law enforcement. But, you know, back in the day, so to speak, you would have, you know, cops who, you know, typical male chauvinist bastards who would say, oh, well, how did you dress? What did you say? Did you, you know, people with sort of, you know, antiquated ideas of consent and whatnot. You basically, my point here is you don't want the very people who are supposed to be responsible for bringing an accused person to justice if they have done something wrong to in any way not pursue the claim with the full tenacity of, you know, people who are really going after something that they believe has happened. You have to sort of treat as an agent of the law, you have to treat any kind of accusation of sexual assault or misconduct as, you know, being made in good faith, even if it ultimately proves that it hasn't been. Problem here is the people who, you know, believe the victim automatically isn't just their, you know, close support network and isn't just the, you know, justice system. You see it happen a lot these days where, especially with this big deluge of accusations that have come out, you see it happen where companies immediately, almost immediately take action against the accused person regardless of what kind of you know, evidence has been presented to them. And of course, these companies very well may be acting on more information that has been released to the public. We can't really know. But in a lot of cases, it does seem like companies like, you know, Netflix and, you know, whoever the accused celebrities are associated with, they do tend to, at least, you know, in terms of how it appears in the media, very quickly respond to these accusations by immediately cutting and severing all ties with the accused person, regardless of how much evidence is really floating out there and, you know, is available at least to the public observer. And this is where it gets a little dicey because, again, it's not a legal proceeding. The companies absolutely have every legal right to sever their relationships with people if they, you know, if they so choose. But you know, it is from sort of a moral or ethical standpoint a little bit dicey because, again, we get into the idea of, you know, you don't want an innocent person's livelihood and their monetary income to be ruined if they haven't, you know, truly done anything to warrant that. So here's where it gets a little bit complicated because, you know, and celebrities, I'm not saying that, again, I don't believe for a second that the majority of claims of sexual assault or rape or misconduct are false in any way, shape, or form, but it is true, and you cannot deny that these false claims do sometimes happen, and that celebrities are, you know, among the most tantalizing targets for false allegations because, you know, especially in this current culture, this culture that has, you know, just in the past couple of weeks seen such a big boom and sort of a growth of consciousness, you see a lot of people who are, you know, very, very eager to do the right thing, and unscrupulous people theoretically can come out and they can see that, especially at this point in our culture, our cultural history, especially here in America, it is easier than ever for simply an allegation with an airtight story to ruin a person's life. Again, not saying that any of these high-profile cases are definitively, you know, fraudulent or anything, but it is now more than ever a time where just an allegation can do real harm to somebody that you want to harm. And you look, you know, back years and years even, like this has been going on for whatever reason, for either monetary reasons or for personal reasons. You know, there have been musicians that I like, Conor Oberst from Bright Eyes, I believe, and Isaac Brock from Modest Mouse, two musicians that I like who were falsely accused of sexual assault or rape or what have you, and those charges were ultimately, I don't know if they ever actually resulted in legal charges, but those claims were eventually dropped because it was revealed that in both cases that it was, you know, fabricated, and I'm not entirely sure how it, you know, came to be in each of those cases, but my point is it does happen. So it does seem a little bit quick on the trigger to, just cut ties and cut off a person's, monetary income and livelihood, when there is precedent for, there's more precedent for real accusations, true accusations, but again, there is precedent for false accusations. So to turn it on a statistical basis where more often than not it's true, rather than waiting, seems a little bit dicey. I'm going to try to reconcile how that could be possible morally, if at all. There are, and it's weird, just as a little aside here, it does seem that there are some people who, they take a denial as evidence that the person is guilty. I remember when I first saw the accusations that just came out a couple days ago against George Takei from, Star Trek. There was this model who said that he roofied him and then was, was fiddling around with him when he came to. And, I remember seeing a comment on the article that got a lot of traction, which was that George Takei's denial, which he tweeted out, which was, fairly, standard and boilerplate. It was just like, oh, this is not consistent with my values. I vehemently deny these allegations. I don't remember the person who was making these allegations against me. People in that comment section were basically going rampant with the idea that because this is a fairly standard denial from George Takei, that it somehow implicates him even more, which is ridiculous. Because, yes, it's true that a guilty person would, generally deny their crime if they didn't think they were in any danger of being caught, if they just denied it. But, who else would, naturally deny their crime? An innocent person. So there's a weird subsection of politically correct, or people who are trying to do good in a society who have their desire to do good has been so warped to the point where they believe that a denial of having done something is some kind of secret admission of guilt, and it's very kind of twisted. And they say, oh, it's all too familiar, these denials, this denial from George Takei, but an innocent person would deny that they've done anything, and they would do so rightly. So I don't think there is a weird subsection, like I said, of people who, in their effort to do good and to be sympathetic and compassionate, which I think is good, they sort of twist in upon themselves and wind up almost becoming as absurd as conspiracy theorists in some ways. It's easy. It's easy to make a decision when, someone has been accused of something and it's brought to court for it and the facts start, coming out to the public en masse. I would, say something like Bill Cosby is a pretty good example of that, where there's just so much, there's so much evidence out there, even just in the public sphere, that's really, really hard not to believe that he did, at least some of what he's accused of. I don't think that there's anybody out there who really believes that, at this point in history, that Bill Cosby is somehow, being the victim of a heinous conspiracy. But there are plenty of cases, these ones in the past few weeks, chief among them, where these things are not reported until many, many years after the fact. The details don't come out. It's not, in any way, shape, or form clear or cut and dry for either the viewing public or for people in the legal sphere who have even more details. And, there's various valid reasons why a victim may not report the crime. And when especially you're dealing with celebrities like we are here in the past couple weeks, the fear of career repercussions is absolutely, high, if not chief, on that list of reasons why somebody would not come forward. You look at the Louis C.K. article, how Louis C.K.'s manager was basically trying to shut up the women who initially accused Louis C.K. of basically whipping out his dick and masturbating in front of them. So, and to go back to that case as well, I read the New York Times article, and the women say that they didn't report it because they weren't entirely sure that, while they had been certainly victimized in some way, they weren't entirely sure that what had been done to them was illegal, because they, had sort of voluntarily gone with Louis C.K. to his Aspen, Colorado hotel room, so they weren't sure how legally culpable he was. So there's a lot of valid reasons, basically, fear of, repercussions, not entirely understanding the legality of the situation, why people won't come forward about these things until many, many years later when they suddenly feel emboldened. It's not somehow invalidating the fact that it happened, and I I truly dislike I truly detest even the implication that because somebody didn't feel safe or supported enough to come forward, that it somehow diminishes their claim. And that's that's something that a lot of those, you know, patriarchal bastards will say when they say, oh, it's not like, oh, she was asking for it. It's like the next worst thing. It's like, you know, oh, why didn't she just come forward? It's so easy, as if going to the police and, you know, probably being ogled and prodded by a bunch of probably men in most cases, especially years and years ago, as if that's some sort of easy thing to do after you've been already fucking traumatized. I hate the idea and the implication that not coming forward somehow diminishes a person's claim. But, you know, in the absence of evidence is not evidence that no crime has been committed, basically, or no violation even has been committed, if you want to take it out of the legal sphere. But unfortunately, it does make it hard to decide whether or not to take action against the accused. You know, I tried when I was writing for this video to comprise basically kind of a litmus test, basically, you know, as to what I would consider if I were in the shoes of a company that was dealing with, you know, an accusation like this. If I were at Netflix or Amazon or wherever any of these motherfuckers has, you know, been making their money. And, you know, I would try to think of what I would use as a litmus test, but it didn't come up very consistent, honestly. I mean, I tried to think of, say, like the number of accusers and whether or not they were associated with each other. To go back to Bill Cosby, there's just so much. It's so hard to, you know, if you even wanted to, if you wanted to suspend your disbelief about Bill Cosby, there's no way all those goddamn women you know, came out and said that he did basically the same thing to them back in, you know, his heyday, basically, and, you know, drugged them and roofied them and raped them and all these horrible things. Like, there's no, it's beyond the point of being a conspiracy of a few people. It's just so widespread. And that's another thing I wanted to, you know, talk about, which is the consistency of the stories and the accounts of the misconduct or assault or what have you. And to take it back to the Louis C.K. thing, you know, back way before the article that came out in the New York Times this month, when I first heard about these accusations that were made against him, it did strike me as kind of odd that all the women who were reporting that he was doing these weird things to them all had basically the same story, where he basically just would, you know, get them alone in a room or with, you know, in a place he controlled, and then, you know, just present his penis and masturbate in front of them. You know, it is kind of a weirdly specific thing. So I think that, in my mind, as much as I, you know, enjoyed Louis C.K.'s comedy and didn't want it to be true, I certainly, I did find it at that point, even well before, like I said, this New York Times article, which actually names the women, I did find it sort of weird that they would all report that same, you know, that same sort of behavior, you know, with years between these incidents. And then you do sort of, you know, again, as a public spectator, this is not in any way, shape, or form an exact science, but you can try to sort of think about ulterior motives or, you know, motivations and causes that, you know, might precipitate these allegations. And this is where it gets really, really kind of gray area and dicey, because, you know, probably it's only relevant to people who are being accused for the first time. I think that, like I said before, as the accusations mount from different unconnected people with the same sort of behaviors being described, it gets a little bit harder to suspend your disbelief as much as you might want to with a, you know, an icon. Like, I don't give a fucking rat's ass about Bill Cosby, never have, but, you know, Louis C.K. was certainly someone that I enjoyed his work, and I, you know, didn't want this to be true. But there's an example that sort of fits this better, which is Jeffrey Tambor, who was accused of being, I forget what the specific accusation actually was, but he plays a transgender woman on Transparent on Amazon. He was in Arrested Development, and he was accused by a former assistant who is transgender, I believe, of some kind of misconduct. But, you know, there's a lot of things that can go wrong in a work relationship. And so, I mean, like I said before, especially in this current climate after the Weinstein thing, It's very easy to, take out a grievance with somebody using this kind of allegation. Not saying that I know for a fact or anything that that's what happened in this specific case, but if it's the first time that anybody has accused Jeffrey Tambor of any kind of misconduct like this, I am more suspicious of that than I am of the Louis C.K. thing when I first heard about it, or about the Bill Cosby thing when I became aware of that as well. So there's varying degrees. Again, my opinion as a spectator, as just a member of the public, doesn't matter one goddamn bit to anybody, I'm pretty sure. But I mean, if I had to make a decision, I would be more restrained with Jeffrey Tambor than I would be with Louis C.K., so to speak. And to sort of move into the end of this video here, I wanted to say that in the end, I don't think you can really fault people or companies like Netflix or Amazon or FX Networks or whoever for taking action early, honestly, because in a world where you may never have all the facts, you basically have to choose, as Netflix did when they cut ties with Kevin Spacey before he sort of copped to it. And you have to choose basically as a company in this situation between potentially enabling a person who's lying or potentially enabling a sexual predator who is also lying. And, abstention is not a choice in this case, because if you abstain, you basically choose to support the potential actual sexual predator who is also lying, rather than the person who potentially might be lying in the worst case scenario. And there is a statistical chance that, they are probably not lying. No innocent person, like I said before, deserves to lose their reputation and their livelihood, but you can sort of see how there is, when it comes right down to it and you have to make a choice, there is this kind of utilitarian calculus where at the very least you can do something to, even if it's not being done in the name of social justice or in the name of doing what's right, there is a pretty clear utilitarian choice where it comes to, saving your own ass as a company who's associated with one of these accused people. And I mean, like I said, abstention in this case is not a choice, so I can't blame people for choosing the less damning one, though I am suspicious of their motives being, more of a, we got to cover our ass as a company thing, rather than this is what we're going to do the right thing, supposedly, and we're going to dress it up like that. I mean, personally, I'm just kind of glad that my opinion doesn't matter at the end of the day on this subject, because, I can just sit back and hope the truth wins out and nobody's asking for my hot takes on fucking Kevin Spacey or Louis C.K. or anything, although those two have basically copped to their misdeeds, basically, to put it lightly. But honestly, I think that it may not be the most PC or socially conscious thing to, not wholeheartedly support the victims, but you're not really harming anybody by saying, I don't know what happened either way, and my opinion doesn't matter, and there's no way I can help any of the people who are involved in this situation with just my opinion. So I'm just going to throw my hands up and say, I don't know either way, and that's good enough for me. Although good is a strong word, but, it is the way it is, so to speak. And, I don't think that, people, again, on the, more PC side of things would necessarily support that. And that's one of the things I do take umbrage with some people who consider themselves progressive, which is that, I think people need to be more accepting of people saying, I'm not involved in this situation. My opinion has no bearing on anything. I don't know. And not knowing is okay, because I truly don't know. And that's the only way to be. And in most cases, it's the responsible way to be, is to just admit that you don't know and may never know. And that's okay, because, again, your opinion and your hot takes have no actual fucking bearing on any of these events anyway. And that's a luxury that we as spectators have, that these companies who are, financially and, reputationally, if that's even a word, tied to these accused people do not have, but it's a luxury that we have as spectators. And I think that it's perfectly okay to just say, I don't know, because you don't know. You weren't there. You can't, just go and polygraph all these people yourself and, look into their eyes and see into their souls and whatnot. So, it's okay. Basically, my point here is to say that you don't know. And, if someone I know says they were abused and for some reason confides that in me, of all people, who has no nice things or comforting things to say ever, but I would do my best to support them, and I would believe them, because if I were personally involved in the situation, I would certainly believe the word of somebody I knew, and I wouldn't let them down as a member of their social support circle. And I've racked my brain, so to speak, as to what I might do if someone I know were accused of abuse. And I think ultimately I would listen to their side of things, but if I weren't satisfied, I got the truth from them when they talked to me, I would probably side with the victim, just to, alleviate my own moral responsibility where I am involved with the situation. And, I understand that statistically, it shouldn't come down to statistics, but sometimes it has to, that, the person who is accusing is probably telling the truth. And, I would want to, there is, again, a difference between not believing somebody who was actually physically assaulted or traumatized in some similar way versus, maybe this person loses their reputation on the other side of things. So basically that's my determination. I'm not entirely sure, because that's one of those situations that you never really know how you're going to react until you get in it. But I truly don't know how I would react if somebody I knew were accused of this kind of, heinous sexual assault. It's a very dicey thing when you get into personally being related to somebody who's done something like this, because people are kind of fucked up with how they react to even when somebody cops to it and they admit what they've done and they apologize, because people try to lump everybody who's associated with the perpetrator in with the perpetrator, in a sense. And to take it as a little aside here, this happens not only with sexual issues, but also with, for example, white supremacy. There's a band that I like, and probably a lot of you guys out there are aware of, called Death from Above 1979. And one of the members, there's only two of them, one of the members of this band, Jesse Kuehler, I think his name is, was sort of lumped in with this white supremacist group called the Proud Boys, because he had sort of a passing association with one of the members of that, white supremacist group, who are, I don't want to say, they're not like the KKK, they're like sort of fucking 4chan meme troller people or whatever, but they do seriously believe in white supremacy. But basically this guy from this band I like had a passing association with this person from years and years before it was discovered he is a white supremacist, and he was signed them to like Vice Records or whatever, I forget, you can look it up if you want. But people were demanding that this guy from this band that I like, who probably doesn't give a fuck about white supremacy at all, they were saying, oh, you aren't doing enough to denounce your relationship with this person. It's like, people are, at the end of the day, even the worst people on the fucking planet are more than just their worst act or their most problematic opinion. That, these acts and these opinions are what is most public facing and what they're known for. But at the end of the day, even the worst people have depth. You can't fault people who know or have passing associations with these problematic people in real life. You can't fault them for seeing them in a slightly different light and maybe seeing some redeeming qualities, even, as absurd as it sounds, because we look at these people and have, we have hatred for what they've done. But, they are real people who lead real lives, and you can't fault the people who are associated with them for not rejecting them earlier. Like, I wouldn't, even think for a second of condemning, say, Pamela Adlon, who was a frequent collaborator with Louis C.K. I wouldn't fault her if she, didn't outright completely denounce Louis C.K. or, stayed friends with him even after this, because she probably sees him in a different way that is much more deep and complex and nuanced than just these horrible things. And people, I'm sure, were saying, oh, why do you associate with this guy? Why do you let him executive produce your show? When these accusations have been going around about Louis C.K. for years and years. But, there's a lot of, there's a lot more to a person than their worst act. And, as being, you can't fault somebody for not wanting to believe that their friend that they see the good side of is, a monster. You can't fault a person for that, and, just for having an association with them, despite what accusations or, at that point, rumors were circulating about them. And, these people also sort of very heavily critique the tone of, for example, Louis C.K.'s apology. And they did this with Kevin Spacey as well, saying, oh, well, Kevin Spacey came out as gay in his his initial rejection of the idea that he had done this, although later on Spacey basically said, oh, I'm seeking treatment, and et cetera. I'm sorry for all this crap that I've done. I'm not sure that he ever addressed the specific accusations, but he definitely said he was seeking treatment. But people heavily critique the tone of these apologies. They say, oh, Kevin Spacey shouldn't have come out as gay because gay people are now going to be associated with pedophiles. But it feels like I'm not a gay person at all. I am not a bisexual person. I really don't have sort of the moral right to speak on this. But as an outside observer, it does feel a little bit weird to me that the gay community would ever, as people who are extremely, extremely sensitive to, being repressed and being pushed into the closet, it does seem a little weird that people would ever, at any circumstance, say, oh yeah, you shouldn't come out of the closet. Basically, it's weird because the initial defense is, oh well, now because Kevin Spacey made a pass at a 14-year-old kid when he was 26, we're going to be associated with pedophiles. But even if Kevin Spacey comes out as gay 5 years from now, if he came out as gay 5 years from now, there would still be that association. So it's a little weird that people are rejecting him kind of living his truth, so to speak. And people got extremely livid about Louis C.K.'s apology as well, which is kind of weird to me, because if you're going to say that a person is monstrous and flawed, why do you expect a perfect apology at the very first moment that this man is reckoning with his actions having a tangible effect on his real life? Why are you expecting a tonally perfect apology from somebody who 5 seconds before you were lambasting for being this monstrously flawed human being? It's weird. It's this weird tonal disconnect from not Louis C.K. necessarily, but from people who are acting as the arbiters of this sort of resolution of his specific case. So it's weird. It's this weird hypocrisy among people, because on one hand, these are all the progressive and liberal people who believe in rehabilitation. If you send somebody to prison, these are the people who want them not to just be imprisoned and suffer and pay some kind of invisible moral penance. These are the people on the left who are supposedly all about rehabilitation. But it doesn't seem like they are necessarily, when it comes to these people, practicing what they preach. And they don't seem concerned with rehabilitating these people at all. And I've asked myself, at what point can a person come back from what they've done when they've been accused and admitted to something like this? The bar is obviously set very high for some people. Like, I don't know that Bill Cosby, I don't think Bill Cosby at all is ever going to come back from what he's been accused of, not only because he's old as fuck, but because the crimes are just that heinous, even though he'll probably never be convicted or serve a day in jail for them. I don't necessarily think Kevin Spacey could or should come back from, what is essentially pedophilia. I feel like there are people, not necessarily Louis C.K., but there is obviously a big difference between roofing and raping somebody and whipping your dick out and masturbating because you have a fucking weird sexual power fetish addiction thing. So I'm not saying that I know, or I'm absolutely sure that Louis C.K. will one day return and be accepted. But I mean, Mel Gibson has been morally rehabilitated. He's on talk shows after basically saying, obviously not as bad as whipping your dick out and masturbating non-consensually in front of people in a hotel room, but Mel Gibson says some extremely, sexist and misogynist and racist and anti-Semitic things. And, he's been morally rehabilitated. Some people, like even Stephen Colbert and somebody I really admire, is kind of rehabilitating not only Mel Gibson, who he had on his show, but, he's trying to, make George Bush seem not as bad as he was. Or even when the accusations about George H.W. Bush's misconduct came up just a few weeks ago, Colbert went out there and said, oh, we don't want to hear this about George H.W. Bush. He was so great. He's the Bush we like. And we're rehabilitating all these people for, these who there's plenty of people out there who argue that they wouldn't deserve it either. And I'm not saying they don't deserve it. I'm just wondering, where is the line? Where is the desire for rehabilitation for Louis C.K. or somebody, even if it's not possible? Where is it? Where is the belief in your fellow man, so to speak, that characterizes the left when we throw people in prison? Like I said, they are the people who generally want to rehabilitate these people. So it just seems like there's this weird disconnect, and I'm not making a lot of cohesive sense. I don't know that I necessarily even have a point about about anything really, or about who should or should not be, eventually accepted back into the public eye. But, it is weird that, these people who generally claim to be for rehabilitation seem to want some very unrealistic things here, and I think that's kind of weird and sad and ultimately kind of hypocritical. They don't even seem to have an idea of what would make a person demonstrably better, other than that person just simply doesn't assault anybody anymore. I don't know what the solution is for that, but to get back to the sort of main meat of the video as we close that out here, ultimately I think what must be destroyed is any kind of culture that prevents victims from feeling safe and coming forward and bringing these accusations against people in a timely manner, so that we can have actual evidence. We don't have to do this moral gray area guesswork, basically, and trying to do these imperfect litmus tests, trying to see who we should believe and who we shouldn't believe, whether you're a spectator or whether you're a corporation who's tied to one of these people or multiple of these people. The idea, ultimately the best thing that I can say for certain, is that destroying the culture of power that prevents people from coming forward and feeling safe, reporting these abuses, criminal or not necessarily criminal, or weirdly, in the middle somewhere, any kind of abuse, people need to be able to feel safe so that we can collect evidence and not have to do this guesswork. And that's the culture that needs to be destroyed. That culture is the enemy. The presumption of innocence is not the enemy. The culture that prevents people from coming forward, feeling safe, feeling comfortable, feeling believed, and having evidence collected that ultimately is used by the justice system to deliver actual concrete results. Any culture that stands as an obstructionist to that is what needs to be destroyed, and not the presumption of innocence. And if we ever get to that point where that culture is destroyed, we will no longer have a need for what is called the court of public opinion. So that was a very fucking random scattershot video from me, obviously Jesus. Next week we will talk about the specific evil of religion, and that will make more sense when I make that video. I promise you that. Thanks for listening to me ramble. Obviously a very sort of difficult topic that we broached here this week. Not something I claim to be an expert on in any way, shape, or form. It's just me kind of thinking out loud, trying to parse my own feelings about how to reconcile the presumption of innocence with trying to be a compassionate person and believing the victim, both of which are good impulses, which stand all too often, unfortunately, because of lack of evidence, because of that terrible culture seemingly at odds. So, I'm obviously Jews. Thanks for watching. Hopefully my fucking camera didn't magically stop recording the video. That would suck. Bye-bye.